There you go. This might be good. So these are done by the animator who did Harold. Apparently. Moonraven did all the animations.
Hello, Santa. It was Christmas Eve, and George and Sally Ryan.
I wasn't expecting a different narrator.
Their newly adopted daughter Elizabeth.
Yeah, this had some Powerpuff Girls energy.
Christmas and the traditions, and especially about Santa Claus.
Hello, Santa.
You have been a good girl all year, Mr. Ryan told her. So I am sure that Santa Claus will come tonight.
Yo, look at that guy's chin. It literally is a little butt. His chin is a butt.
Was intrigued by this news. She had never heard about Santa Claus at the orphanage which she had been living at prior to Claus. She had nice gifts and goodies.
Like, you seeing this? That is a butt right there. Like, you can't. Hold on. Let me just show you something for the brevity of this. You just need to see this. Just so you can imagine exactly what I'm imagining. I have to get that really small. There we go. Just don't look at the top part. Don't imagine anything from the chin up.
Elizabeth was intrigued by this news.
That was not worth it.
She had never heard about Santa Claus at the orphanage which she had been living at prior to being adopted by the Ryans. But how will Santa Claus get in the house tonight? Elizabeth asked. He will fly up on the rooftop in his sleigh and come down the chimney, Mrs. Ryan told her. And tomorrow morning when you wake up, there will be all sorts of lovely presents.
There will be all sorts of presents.
Just for you, said Mr. Ryan. I am sure
that using
Mr.
like a fucking
Claus
laptop microphone?
By the way you helped your mother decorate the Christmas
like
tree.
a fucking Dell Latitude in 2005?
To love the delicious cookies that we made together, added Mrs. Ryan. Santa will fit down here? Elizabeth asked.
I like how they're not. They're just showing this woman's legs and like the top part of her body. It reminds me of the secretary from Powerpuff Girls.
But you need to get to bed early, young lady, Mr. Ryan said, or Santa might pass right over this house. A few hours after they had all gone to bed, Elizabeth found that she just could not sleep. All this talk about jolly fat men and Christmas cookies and presents.
Miss Bellum? What was she, the secretary?
Excited.
I don't remember.
So she got out of bed, got dressed, and waited for Santa to come dancing out of the chimney. After a few minutes, Elizabeth heard footsteps in the snow outside and could see someone coming towards the house.
The gnome.
She then heard what sounded like someone struggling to fit a key into the doorknob. "I'll help you, Santa," Elizabeth said with delight as she opened the door for the mysterious stranger. Standing there was a man.
You fucked up,
"Hello,
kid.
Santa," she said with glee. "I am happy to see you made it.
Those
But I
CGI
thought you would
teeth.
come down the
It's
chimney."
too scary looking.
The man standing
No!
there just stared at Elizabeth and said nothing. Elizabeth lit some candles and welcomed the man into the living room.
"Where are your parents?"
the man asked. "Asleep," she said. "I'm the only one up." The man began to make his way towards the bedrooms when Elizabeth grabbed his arm. "Wait," she said. "Don't you have presents?" The man said nothing but looked around in confusion. "Ah," said Elizabeth, "I guess you want to eat your cookies first. I made them with my mother just tonight.
Does he have a
Please
hole in
try
his
them."
pocket, or is it clipping through his pants?
The man slowly began eating the cookies and staring strangely at Elizabeth. Elizabeth just looked back, a big smile on her
I mean,
face
she's
and
pretty
a
scary
sparkle
looking
in her eye.
herself, so.
"Now the milk," she said. "You can't eat cookies without milk." The man drank down the glass of milk with
They
three
had
quick
some
gulps
music, though.
and then turned towards Elizabeth.
"Thank you.
He said,
What if he's a good guy?
Now I will go to see your parents.
Oh.
You will wait here for me."
Then the man pulled out a long, sharp blade and crept slowly into the Ryans' bedroom.
No!
As Elizabeth waited for him to return, she heard strange sounds coming from the bedroom and could only imagine what the man could be doing in there. Some time later the man returned.
"You will come with me."
He said. "You will take me to the North Pole?" Elizabeth asked with a joyous smile.
"Yes."
Said the man.
Yes.
The two of them then left the house.
Good story. Look at this cat. Yeah, I don't know about that story. Dude, I love the CGI. Oh my
In
God!
a small Midwestern town suburb, there lived a 10-year-old girl named Claire. Claire was a joyous girl who had a love of all things bright and
It
colorful.
was like a rainbow cat.
Like most girls her age, she liked to dream about being able to fly like a bird or swim fast like a dolphin.
I don't think every kid
Her
that's
parents,
10-year-old
of course,
wants to
thought
like
nothing
fly.
of it. "Kids these days," her mother would say. "I remember the 4th grade," her father would joke. Also, like most girls her age, Claire was scared of monsters and all the places they could come from. Under her bed, in her closet, and even under her own bed covers.
Tiny
One
bit,
night,
maybe.
Claire was reading a book to herself
don't think so,
in bed
though.
in an attempt to fall asleep quicker. Unknown to her, a shadowy figure was watching
Red
from
Skull.
in the backyard. The figure was wearing a dark brown burial shroud, and it had a face resembling a brownish-red skull. As soon as Claire fell asleep, it sprang into action.
Oh my God!
Running across the backyard, it leaped onto a gutter and started climbing upwards.
That's the most animated
When it
I've
was
ever
close
seen anything in
enough
this.
range, it leapt up onto Claire's window, and with one hard pull opened it up and slipped inside. It made its way to Claire's bed, holding a medical syringe in its hand. It quickly stuck the syringe to Claire's arm and injected its contents. It then got out of Claire's room as quickly as it came in. The next day after school, Claire had to drop off some books at the public library, so she decided to forgo taking the bus home.
You can turn into a skeleton?
After Claire was finished at the library, she realized the need to hurry home fast before her parents started getting worried. As she passed a path through the woods, She realized that heading straight through would take her in the same general direction as her house. Though reluctant to enter at first, she eventually mustered the courage and dashed into the woods. Unfortunately for Claire, the woods were thick and the path split up a couple of times, and one wrong turn was all it took for her to get lost.
The story is fucking 15 minutes long. I know, it's like 3 different stories.
And Claire was still lost in the woods. In the distance she could hear owls hooting, and a light fog was rising around the base of all the tree trunks. Claire was frightened, but kept trying to convince herself that she was alone. For if she was alone, then there wouldn't be anything around to be afraid of. Suddenly she heard something off to her right. Looking through the trees, she thought she could make out the silhouette of something. Claire started to pick up the pace a little. After walking another 100 feet, she heard something behind her. Turning around, she could make out the silhouette.
I mean, there's stories for
clearer,
kids, though, I think, so.
But mainly all she could see was that it was huge. Panicking, Claire started jogging, but didn't get very far before she heard a twig snap from very
like
close
stories from scary stories to tell at night.
Coming down on the
They're from
back of her
fucking
neck.
children's storybooks, dude.
Claire turned around, but what she stared at petrified her with fear. Staring down at her was a monster, 100 times her size, its body covered with bluish-gray hair, 2 goat-like horns protruding out of its
The
head,
music, too.
and yellow eyes with blood-red pupils. For about a solid minute, the two stood still, locked onto the other's eyes. All the while, Claire tried to start running, but was unable to make her legs move.
This is a fucking jam.
The creature took a small step forward, at which point Claire finally started to run. The creature followed in hot pursuit, taking giant leaps with every step. Claire felt the adrenaline shoot through her body as she ran, and even thought she could hear it ringing in her ears. Suddenly, Claire came to a halt in front of a steep hill. She looked down to see that the bottom of the hill was too far to safely tumble down. Then she heard a growl behind her. Before she could completely turn around, the creature lunged at her. Instinctively, Claire
The
leapt
fuck
out
is
of
like
the
a
way of the
QTE
monster,
game?
but ended up going right over the edge of the hill. She let out a long, shrill scream as she fell through the air towards the rocky hillside. Suddenly, Claire felt something shoot through her whole body.
She's flying
Whatever it
now.
was, it put a lot of pressure on her muscular system, and it forced her arms to spread out like airplane wings.
What?
She started gliding just before hitting the hillside, while her body started changing. Claire's breastbone got heavier and weighed her down, which required her to flap her arms to stay airborne.
What?
All along her arms, feathers began sprouting and folding backwards to allow air to pass over them. Claws began to grow from Claire's fingers and toes, curving around into a hook. Her whole body then meshed itself internally and spread out again. Claire was at a complete loss for words about what just happened to her.
She's like,
Before she
alright, I'm a
concerned
bird now.
herself any further, however, she looked behind her to see the monster looking mean-eyed at her and snarling its teeth. Then it finally dawned on Claire that somehow she could fly. Without any hesitation, she lifted her wings upward and soared higher into the sky, farther out of the monster's reach.
Kind of a win-win.
Whenever she started losing lift, Claire would give a couple strong flaps of her wings to stay airborne. After a while, Claire gave her wings a rest, while the cool night air
Oh my
let
god,
her
my
glide along,
microphone mute button isn't
gradually
working
getting
on this
closer to
menu.
the ground.
I didn't even realize it.
Being so young, Claire wasn't able to fully grasp
Allergies
just how
are, like, driving me
miraculous her new
crazy.
ability of flight was.
I didn't know you could like
While
hear
she
me
was
sniffing like that.
astonished by it, she had yet to fully develop her perception of reality.
It's only like on that one menu.
An adult in the same situation would go mad
Now,
about such a revelation,
Myself like,
whereas a little kid like Claire would
Oh,
have yet to let go of their imagination, so they can accept flying without fear of going mad. Claire took a long while to enjoy her newfound ability, and all it could give to her. She especially enjoyed the bird's eye view of the suburbs. Being able to see many square miles of land at once was awe-inspiring. As Claire made a right turn into some clouds,
what the
something
fuck?
in the corner of her eye.
Nah, that was just because of the
Looking right,
the sound in that
she
game.
thought she could see a dark figure through the clouds. Alarmed, Claire swooped
I was just
down
messing with that
fast.
other menu for the
As
first
she
time.
turned back around, she immediately saw something rushing towards her. Claire reacted just in the nick of time to avoid the creature, swooping down even lower out of its way. As it passed over her, Claire got a good look at the creature. It had large griffin wings, extra long talons,
What is
silver
this
feathers
story?
all over its body, and its eyes gleamed blue light that shone through the dark night. Claire looked down for a good place on the ground to hide. She spotted a lake some 200 meters to her front right. All of a sudden, the creature came back around for a second attack. Before Claire could look back up, the creature charged head-on at her. Thinking fast,
It does kind of
Claire
remind
did
me
a
of Manny
nosedive
Lane.
out of the creature's way. She did it just in time, too. The creature slammed into her right foot as it flew over her. Claire cried out in pain for a moment before continuing her descent towards the lake. If she could get under the water, the creature would be unable to reach her, assuming it couldn't dive into the water like a seagull. Claire looked behind her to see the creature making yet another charge at her. Claire looked back in front of her to see that the lake was almost right above her. She could hear the sound of the creature's wings flapping, getting closer and closer behind her. She looked back again, only to be staring directly into the creature's open mouth, which was no more than 2 feet away. Claire let out a brief but ever so spine-chilling scream as she did another nosedive as the creature passed over her again. She didn't even know if
Stop
she was
flying.
directly over the lake. A few seconds later,
There you go.
Claire did indeed fall into the lake, though the impact sent a sudden burst of pain throughout her whole body. As she started to push her way under the water, Claire felt another sensation happening in her body. She looked down to see that her hands were returning back to normal, as well as
She gonna turn into a fish now?
her breastbone also returned to normal, and all the feathers along her arms started falling out. Then Claire's body started to change again. Her legs melted together and became scaly, while her cheeks sliced open in 5 perfectly even rows.
So this is
Realizing
just
she
Zelda
could
now.
breathe underwater, Claire immediately began swimming frantically towards the lake bottom, as far away as possible from the
Like, pretty
creature.
much.
Safe on the lake bottom and not forced to go back to the surface for air, Claire laid back on some rocks and thought about how great both her new swimming and flying abilities were. The lake bottom was so clear, and Claire could make out the silhouettes of several fish, both big and small. She then got up off the rocks and began swimming crazily around in the water, fully embracing the freedom of movement bestowed upon her. Then she began counting how many fish she could see in the distance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Claire stopped
The
counting.
fuck?
She had spotted something that looked eerily different from a regular fish. It looked to be huge,
Oh
very
no.
long with gleaming yellow eyes. Claire looked away, thinking
Fuck
that
that.
maybe it would ignore her if she ignored it. After looking back and seeing that it
Get out
was
of the
gone,
fucking water.
she breathed a watery sigh of relief and started swimming towards the lake shore. She hadn't gone farther than a few yards when Claire saw something move out of the corner of her eye.
Yo, this music is getting
Claire
sick.
looked to see a silhouette of something very long and serpentine swimming alongside her. Claire panicked and began swimming faster. Suddenly, something darted out right in front of her. It was the serpent. It had gleaming yellow eyes,
Fuck
a
that.
half-dozen tentacles protruding from all along its body, and had skin scalier than any fish known to mankind. Just like the previous creatures, it immediately charged for Claire. Claire quickly swam out of the way and began heading towards the lake shore. The serpent stayed right behind her the entire way, never more than a few yards behind Claire, and always with its mouth wide open, ready to eat her up.
Yeah, fuck that.
After a long time of frantic swimming, Claire finally dragged herself onto the lake shore. She looked back to see the serpent swimming away, probably to hunt down easier fish to catch. Claire's body then returned to normal once again. Then, with much exhaustion,
That's it?
Claire began to walk to her house, where her parents were worried sick about her.
Yeah, just walk home.
All Claire thought about her adventure was that it was scary. Very, very scary.
Is that it? Is that really it? Oh, okay.
Claire walked with her parents through the theater lobby towards theater number 5. They were going to see the latest blockbuster release of the year.
Dude, the giant rat. From outer space. Who wants your cave women? Poser vision. Giant rat.
The legendary beasts. It had received critical acclaim for its superb special effects and action sequences, which were so real-looking that some have claimed that everything in the film actually was real. Claire had managed to keep her abilities in flight and breathing underwater a secret from her parents up until then, and Claire hoped to keep it a secret forever.
You can just fly whenever you want?
The movie started after 20 minutes of previews, and it was just as awesome as everyone had said it was. The action sequences were
because it is a 10-year-old.
top-notch. The dialogue was well written, and the story
Again, these are stories from Scary Stories to Tell at Night. These are like Goosebumps
Claire's
stories.
Parents left to get more snacks. After returning her gaze to the screen, Claire stared wide-eyed in horror at what she was seeing. There on the screen was her, from the night 1 year earlier. Claire watched spellbound as the events from the night played out right in front of her eyes, but from multiple angles and perspectives. As Claire watched the big screen, a figure holding a camcorder also watched. A figure who wore a dark brown burial shroud and whose face resembled
Is he just holding a brain?
Skeleton.
He was just holding a brain the entire time? That was by far one of the weirdest ones. Why was he a red skeleton? I don't know. Nobody knows.
The clown statue. Once a couple needed a day off from parenting their 2 children, so they went out to dinner with
Is that a clown?
to a restaurant about
Just off screen, there's just like a creepy clown off screen.
an hour away. Since they were going so far, they called up their best babysitter, Ashley. Ashley did not want to keep the kids up watching TV, so she waited until they were asleep.
So this is Ashley.
When they were finally asleep, she
What
called
the fuck is going on over here?
parents to ask if she could watch the TV in their room. They said it was fine. But she had one more request. She asked if she could put a blanket over the clown statue in the corner of their room, because she has always been scared of clowns. The father paused, then said in a bewildered tone of voice, But we don't have a clown statue. Terrified, she slowly hung up the phone, with the father still yelling at her to call the police and get the kids out of the house. With her eyes bulging wide in horror, she slowly turned around. The clown statue was gone. Ashley got up to run, but was caught by something and pulled back against the sofa. The clown had grabbed her around the throat with a black cord. Ashley kicked and gagged but could not pull away.
Not the clown.
Finally, she was able to pull the cord far enough away from her throat to let out a scream. In a few seconds, the two children came downstairs.
Yo, you hearing this music?
What was happening? Ashley yelled for them to get out of the
fucking
house
jam.
quickly, but the children just stood frozen with fear. Finally, one of the children snapped out of his shock and ran over to the clown who was attacking his babysitter. The child began punching and kicking at the clown with all of his might. Finally, the clown could stand it no longer and released his grip on Ashley. As he turned towards the boy, still punching and kicking ferociously, Ashley grabbed him by his hair and yanked back his head.
Damn.
The clown stared up at Ashley, a look of viciousness in his face. He then let out a loud screech and began clawing at Ashley's wrists.
I'm the Joker, baby.
Finally, she released him and he jumped back. As Ashley got a better look at him, she could see he was a very small
The pants
boy,
crotch
not
part
much
is just like
bigger than the
green.
children. Before she knew it, the man lunged on top of her, biting her hand and scratching at her face. As she pulled her hands away to avoid his teeth,
Small
the
clown
grabbed her throat
invades
with
house.
both hands and began to choke her to death. Just then there was a loud crack, and the clown fell off of her, screeching in pain. Ashley coughed and gasped for breath as she saw that the children were now holding weapons and attacking the little man with all of their might.
The kids came
The
through.
man broke free from them and ran towards the door.
What if they just all beat the shit out of this clown?
With blood dripping from his head and teeth, he stared at her with murder in his eyes. Just then, he was hit from behind by the children and fell right into Ashley's arms.
This is
With all of her strength,
What?
she lifted the little
She just
clown
fucking
up
body
and
slams
slammed
him.
him down onto the floor
What?
as hard as she could. The clown laid there motionless. After the police arrived, they explained to Ashley and the couple that the clown was actually a lunatic serial killer who had escaped from the mental hospital about a
My
week
God.
From what they discovered in the couple's attic, they realized that the lunatic had been living in their house since he escaped. Being a dwarf, the lunatic was not very strong.
She just
and
fucking
was killed
body slammed
instantly
him.
when Ashley
What?
slammed him to the ground
She killed him.
and broke his neck.
Oh my God. What is this a picture of? Who is this? Oh my God, he body slammed her. Killed, instantly killed. That one's going in the favorites section. Body slam instantly. Imagine telling that story to people. Yeah, I body slammed a clown when I was babysitting for these two kids one night and killed him. Amazing.
The Black Record.
Oh, new narrator.
There was once a small town just outside the big city called Cherry Creek. It was an ordinary town with a butcher shop, a library, a school, a church, and a music store. Matt, who was a regular customer to the music store, really loved music. One day, while he was browsing, he found an old vinyl record. It was black all over.
They
No
normally
album
are.
title,
Oh, you
no
mean like the
band
cover?
name, no artwork on the cover or on the record.
That's not really
It
that
was
weird.
just plain black. He asked the store owner about it, and the store owner looked it over and said, that's strange.
Like, that looks creepy.
Never seen this before. Maybe the previous store owner bought it, Matt said.
Yeah, it looks like
"That's
Ralph
impossible,"
Bluton in the
said the
picture.
owner. I'm the one who built this place, and I've never seen it. Then the owner said, well, you're my best customer, so I'll sell it to you for $5.
You're my best
So
customer.
Matt bought
Thank
the
you.
record for $5. When he
Hi,
got
puppy.
home that night, he was very excited about the new record he just bought. Oh boy, I bet it's an old, forgotten rock band, he said to himself. Then he got out his old record player and began to play it. At first,
And
he
began
heard nothing,
play it.
and then he heard a strange sound.
Okay.
And then the record stopped. What just happened? Pfft, that was a waste of money, he said.
Why does he
Then
have
he
6
thought,
whiskey bottles
maybe I
lined
played
up?
the wrong side.
All the same
He
kinds.
turned the record over and played the opposite side. When he did so, the record said, Just then, there was a flash of lightning, and Matt screamed.
Why'd you scream?
Weeks passed, and his friends got very worried about him, so they went to check on him. But Matt was nowhere to be found. All they saw was the black record, still playing.
Record only plays for like 20 minutes and then it's over. There's that cat. Oh, that cat. This one's 13 minutes. I think that crow killed all those people. What's he doing? Sound die?
It remained.
There we go. There's just no sound. It remained. Written by Charles Swan.
Years
Fear
ago,
has no name.
in a small, quiet town, was a mass murder. Till this day, it remains unsolved. It began with a family named the McCormicks.
Oh, they look bad.
John was a police officer and fell
Yeah.
in love with a hometown teacher. Later on
Looks
in life,
very
they had
evil.
a son named Daryl. Soon, he would have begun his first year of high school. His
I can't
family
watch
had
this
lived in
like
a
this. If
deserted
it's like this the
school.
entire time.
He had told
No. I'm good with those post effects. Bum, 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 bum.
The second stall.
Another narrative.
Michelle was the most beautiful and popular girl in school. Everyone
Michelle?
envied her good looks and all the money she seemed to have, but she was as wicked as a witch.
It's like Minnie
spreading
Mouse fucking
rumors
top
and
she has
talking
on.
behind people's backs. When someone
shit.
complimented her, she would make an ugly grin and say, "I know, right?" As if it was the most obvious thing in the world. When someone fell, she would laugh and point at them. No one seemed to notice because she was so gorgeous, with her long blonde hair and stunning eyes. One morning, Michelle was putting on her makeup when her cell phone began to ring. "Hello," she answered snottily. "I love you," said the caller. "Who
That's-
is this?" she questioned.
It's from a brand new song.
Obsessive. Michelle hung up quickly.
These sound effects.
"Creep," she mumbled. Michelle tried to put the thought out of her head, but it seemed to stay with her. When she was on the bus, she felt as if someone was watching her. She would turn around only to see kids talking and laughing like usual. Her friend Dawn seemed to notice something was wrong. "What'd you turn around for?" Dawn asked curiously.
Why did you turn
"I don't
around?
know," Michelle replied. "I just feel like someone is watching me." Dawn tried to cheer her friend up. "Don't worry, you're just feeling things." All day, Michelle felt as someone was watching her, someone always behind her.
feeling
She could feel it
things.
prickling between her shoulder blades, but she could never spot who was watching. In the middle of class, she was sure she could feel eyes staring at her every move, but when she looked around, everyone had their eyes on their own work. Michelle stood up and asked to use the restroom, to get refreshed, and just to leave. Her
To get
teacher gave her a
refreshed.
hall pass, and she went. When in the bathroom, she heard heavy breathing coming from the second stall. "Hello?" she said. No reply. She heard a hideous laughter. This time she went and knocked angrily on the stall. "Shut up! Your breathing is so freaking annoying!" She heard herself echo, but she could tell it wasn't that, because the bathroom was quite small and did not echo at all. "You want to play games? I'll play your freaking games."
You want
She
to play
opened
games,
the stall door and
bitch?
saw Dawn standing there with a pen and needle, staring at Michelle intently. "Dawn?" she asked. "What are you doing with that stuff?" "I need your face." "What you talking about? My face?" Dawn knocked Michelle over and pinned her to the bathroom floor. She dug her fingernails into the other girl's skin and tore Michelle's face off. There was
Oh
a
my
loud
God.
shriek, and Dawn sewed it onto her own face.
Just like that?
"I am your face." She then dragged the lifeless body into the second stall and hung her over the toilet. She tightly closed the stall door
Okay.
and walked away, never to be seen again.
What? I want to take her face off. I want to put your face on my face. Yeah, I don't know what the moral of that one was. Don't take your friend's face. One of the commandments. Don't covet thy neighbor's face. It's funny because it's a skeleton.
A couple were in Las Vegas on vacation. When they got there that morning, they booked a room for several days.
A couple?
They spent the day seeing the sights and gambling, then went back to their room. After settling in, they noticed a weird smell. They checked the closets and curtains,
I like
the
his rat
blankets
tail.
and pillows, and the refractor and the bathroom, and even the plumbing and vents, but could not find the source of the smell. After giving up, they decided to try and ignore the smell and turned off the light and went to
Oh,
sleep.
I know. It's in the bed. It's in the bed.
With each passing day, the
We've heard this
smell
story a
became
million
worse.
times.
Finally, they called the room attendant. He, too, was puzzled by the awful stench and searched the room for where the smell originated, and found it was coming from the mattress. He lifted it up and made a ghastly discovery. There lay a body that had been rotting for days, while the unsuspecting couple had slept just inches above it.
Oh my God. He puked on his wife.
The new wife.
The new wife.
Henry and Loretta had been married for 6 years. They were a nice couple and very much in love. Wherever Henry went, Loretta was always by his side. Then all of a sudden, Loretta became gravely ill. And not
No.
long after, she died. Henry was heartbroken. At her funeral, Henry barely spoke. He
He's
just
gonna-
sat there.
he's gonna start dating the woman
staring at
next to him,
Loretta's
isn't he?
coffin, a blank look on his face. Loretta's sister Marie tried her best to console Henry, but Henry just seemed lost without the one he had loved so much. "I do not know how I can go on without her, he told Marie. Why don't you go away for a while? She told him. It might do you good to be away from here for a bit. That's a good idea, he said. I think I'll go back to my hometown for a while to visit some of my old friends there. About a month later, Henry returned from his trip. He was seen driving into town with a woman in the passenger seat. Later, when he came to town to do some shopping, a few of the
I like how
townspeople asked him who
the
his
like
friend
model
was. When Henry seemed confused,
the
with
blender
the
artist is
question,
like starting to
they
get like
told
weird with
him
the
they had seen a
faces
woman
or
seated
whatever. What
next to him
program is
when
this?
he
It's like a
drove into
specific
town.
program.
Oh, he said, that was my wife. The townspeople looked at each other, confused. Oh, that's nice, they said.
Called
A
Poser.
little surprised
Oh,
that
that's all the
Henry had
poser
remarried
jokes.
just after a month
Like, look at
since
that
his
guy's
wife's
nose.
death.
There's like a
Why don't you
crevice.
bring her into town tonight so we can all meet her? One of the women said. I will, said Henry. I was going to bring her with me today, but she seemed a bit tired from the long trip and wanted to rest.
Is that
Some
cell phone
days went
sound?
by, and the townspeople began to see less and less of Henry, and even less of his new wife. Every now and then they would be seen driving through town, but that was all. A few months later, Marie stopped back in town to visit her sister's grave. She had heard about how quickly Henry had remarried and was a bit angry about it. The more she thought about it, however, the more she was glad that Henry had found someone new to take his mind off his loss. Loretta would want him to be happy, after all. That day she ran into Henry in town. Oh, it's good to see you again, she said. I hear you remarried. I guess my advice was a little more than helpful. He stared at her strangely. Yes, he said.
Yeah, I can't put my
Thank
finger
you.
on Henry's face exactly.
Well, she said, may I meet her? For a moment, Henry looked distracted. It was as though his thoughts were elsewhere. Then he came around. My wife has not been feeling well, he said. In fact, that's why I am in town today. I need to buy some medicine at the pharmacy. I see, said Marie.
Some
Maybe another time.
medicine at the pharmacy.
Sometime later, Marie was back in town to visit her sister again. As much as she was glad about Henry's new marriage, she couldn't help but feel sorry for Loretta. Oh, my beautiful sister.
I don't really like this
How
story
could I
that much,
forget about
honestly.
you so easily. Later,
Nothing
when she was
crazy
having
has happened.
lunch, she asked the waitress if she had seen Henry or his wife in town today. No, said the waitress.
Where's all the weird
I haven't
skeletons
seen
and
them
shit?
yet today. I'll pay them a visit, Marie thought. After driving down the old road that led to Henry's place, she walked up to the door and knocked a few times, but no one answered. Hello, she called, but still no answer. She noticed
Hello?
that Henry's car was not in the driveway. They must be out somewhere, she thought. As she was about to leave, she thought she could see someone through one of the windows seated in a chair. Hello? She called, but there was no answer. She tried the door and found it unlocked.
Yeah, that house looks
so
like it
she
was
went
made in
in.
an MMO.
She made her way across the kitchen to the bedroom and knocked on the bedroom door, but no one answered. She opened the door to discover a woman seated in a chair by the window wearing a sun hat.
It's the
Hello,
original
she said to the
wife,
woman.
isn't
My
it?
name is Marie, and I'm a friend of Henry's. You must be his wife. The woman said nothing. Assuming she was asleep,
Oh my
Marie nudged her to wake
God.
her up, and the woman's head fell backwards,
She's
the sun
dead.
hat falling to the ground. Marie took one look and screamed. Sitting in the chair was her sister Loretta.
The way he said that.
Months before.
Her sister Loretta. Yo, look, it's fucking Harold. What? Chilling with that dog? That looks weird. Maybe Harold's people had some appreciation for Harold in the past.
The Haunted Church.
What's
There once was a man by the name of Frederick Cummings. He was 47 years of age and often did odd jobs around the town he lived in. He was
Frederick
also afraid of
Cummins,
ghosts.
47.
One day, a pastor was offering $50 to anyone who would clean the church after hours. Frederick, thinking it was good money, decided to take the offer. The pastor then told Frederick that if he could clean up the entire church from top to bottom and not leave one speck of dust or dirt or anything, he would double his pay.
Guys are pretty close
Frederick
there.
took the challenge and shook the pastor's hand in agreement.
It's like
and then
fucking
went home to eat dinner.
Reverend 47.
He came back at 4:30 p.m. sharp, and outside the church stood the pastor. Frederick, remember, if something goes awry, give me a call, and I'll come as quick as I can, stated the pastor. You don't have to worry about that, said Frederick.
Yeah, he could be a priest
I've
pretty
cleaned
easy, I think.
bigger places than this. Well, all right, Frederick. Good luck, the pastor said as he got in his car and left. Frederick then unlocked the door to the church, went to the janitor's
I don't trust this guy.
and changed into the janitor's attire, then began to work. Hours passed. The sun was going down, and Frederick was done cleaning everything up.
His
Every
outfit's
single room was
pretty-
swept, vacuumed,
pretty swanky.
and mopped, as well as the windows being washed.
Yeah, that mustard brown.
$100, here I come, shouted Frederick. His voice echoed through the church.
That
As he
echo
began to
effect.
push the cart of cleanage, as he began to push the cart of cleaning supplies back
Listen
to the
to it
janitor's
again.
closet, he heard footsteps from upstairs.
Wait, hold on,
Pushed
hold on,
the
hold
cart
on.
of Frederick. His voice echoed 100, as well as the windows being washed. $100, here I come, shouted Frederick.
The
His
way they
voice
did that
echoed
is so
through
funny
the
to me.
church. As he began to push the cart of cleaning supplies back to the janitor's closet, he heard footsteps from upstairs, but he was the only one in the church. Hello? He called, but there was no answer. He heard the footsteps again,
Hello?
but now it sounded like there were two people running back and forth louder than ever. Hello! Screamed Frederick, but still there was no answer. Maybe some teenager snuck in here and is playing some trick on me. Yeah, that's it, he thought to himself. But he was scared. Just then, he heard a loud bang down the hall,
Jesus
which made him
Christ.
jump. Listen here, if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police, yelled Frederick. Everything then became dead silent. Frederick, thinking that he scared the people off, began to calm down and continued to the janitor's closet to put up the supplies. As he was putting up the supplies and got undressed out of the janitor's suit, nightfall came and the church became pitch black. Just when Frederick was about to leave, he heard a woman crying. Frederick, being a ladies' man, decided to investigate.
What?
He turned on his flashlight and proceeded down the hall. Hello? Who's in there?
What?
Said Frederick in a calm voice. The crying got louder with every step Frederick took, until he
At first
got
it was
to
like
the doors of
porn
the
music
sanctuary.
bass sounds.
The crying had stopped, and everything got dead
Bow,
silent
bada,
again.
bow, bow.
Frederick
It's
opened
like-
up the doors of the sanctuary, and as soon as he looked in, he heard a blood-curdling scream. Frederick jumped back in fright as soon as he did. The sanctuary door slammed shut. What is going on here? Frederick said in a stuttering voice. He then stood up and walked cautiously down the hall to the exit, but something caught his eye in one of the Bible study rooms. As he adjusted his eyes, he saw two glowing red eyes staring at him. When Frederick saw this, he screamed at the top of his lungs and ran out of the church as fast as his legs could take him. He started up his truck and sped out of the parking lot. The next morning, the pastor came over to his house and knocked on the door to give Frederick his money. Frederick answered, but was shaking with fright. Is something wrong, Frederick? Questioned the pastor. The church is haunted, yelled Frederick. What? That's impossible, said the
It's
pastor.
haunted.
Well, it is. I'm never going back to that place as long as I live, yelled Frederick. The pastor sighed. I understand if your imagination got the best of you last night, but here's your money. The pastor handed him $100 and walked to his car. As the pastor got in his car, a book fell onto the ground.
Oh
Took no
my
notice and drove
god.
away. Frederick saw this and went to pick it up. What he'd picked up was a black book, and on the cover was red Latin words. This doesn't look like a Bible, thought Frederick. As he opened it up,
Oh my god, we're so close!
Drawn pictures and Latin words written in blood. Frederick couldn't believe his eyes as he turned the pages.
He gets sucked into his eyes.
Upside down pentagram, and underneath it more Latin letters, also in blood, with photos of people being sacrificed in a chamber. This is a satanic Bible, and that was a satanic church. Frederick then went to the police station and showed the police the book and told them about the pastor. The police then dispatched over to the pastor's house to arrest him. But when they got there, the pastor's house was nowhere in sight. When they drove over to the church, it was also nowhere in sight. To this day, no one knows what happened to the church or the pastor, but he and the church were never seen again.
Well then. Yeah, it's a pretty long playlist. There's still quite a few left. We'll watch more some other time. I want to watch one last video and then we'll wrap it up, I think. Yeah, so that Raven Moon Raven, they used to make a lot of animations. I guess they don't anymore. I wonder what happened to them. Wonder what happened. All right. Let's watch one last video. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do a bedtime story.
During the autumn of 2003, staff at a holiday resort in California contacted the police to report having discovered the bodies of 2 of their guests. Uncomfortable questions still remain over the exact circumstances surrounding this tragic incident. Join us as we investigate death in Gorda Springs.
Gorda Springs. Gorda.
As he made his way along the gravel path that wound its way through the centre of the resort, Leonardo Flores could feel himself becoming anxious. The guests he was on his way to see had proven somewhat problematic ever since they had checked in at the start of the week, and he was unsure exactly how they were now going to react to being asked to leave the site.
That was some fucking tough
The
show.
2 women had arrived on the Monday morning,
You're gonna have to get the fuck out of
paying
here.
for a week's stay and asking if the room next door to theirs could be left vacant for the duration of their visit. When it had been explained that the staff could not facilitate this request due to pre-existing bookings, the pair had become upset and then requested that they be left alone whilst they were staying at the resort. The women had even gone as far as to insist that there be no maid service until after they had departed. The venue had agreed, on condition that they sign a waiver against using this arrangement to write an unfavourable review later on. Despite this request, Flores had still managed to sneak into the room whilst they had been in the nearby diner ordering a meal,
I don't think I've
and
ever
had
seen
found
this one.
nothing out of the ordinary. The morning after they had checked in, the guests staying in the room next door had informed Flores of an incident that had happened on the previous evening.
Yeah, they're all just like smoking
He and
meth.
his family had been disturbed by a persistent and irritating pounding noise coming through the adjoining wall. It took him 15 minutes of knocking on the door to the cottage until one of the women had answered in a confused state, before she then closed it again without speaking.
Okay.
Now, on the day they were due to check out, the pair had failed to do so, and whilst it was not uncommon for a guest to be running a little late for their departure, there was something about the couple which troubled the hotel employee. Something that he could not quite put his finger on. As he arrived at the door to the cottage, Flores attempted to shrug off these thoughts, before politely knocking. When there was no reply, he knocked again, more
What the
forcefully this
fuck?
time, but was still unable to
Is that an
elicit
Oni
a
mask?
response. With the curtains closed and being unable to see into the room, Flores had no choice but to open the door with the master key and to go inside. Moments later, the horrified Clark was running as fast as he could back to the main desk to call for the police, with the cottage door left swinging wide open behind him. The police officers who were called to the Gorda Springs Resort on the morning of the 7th of October 2003 found the bodies of Abigail Tapia and Jacqueline Torres lying next to each other on the double bed of their holiday cottage. Black plastic bin liners had been securely taped over both of their faces, and their hands and legs had been bound using a number of identical lengths of white rope. Investigators reported that there were no obvious signs of injury or trauma anywhere on the bodies of either woman, both of which were dressed in t-shirts and their underwear. There was no evidence of a weapon or any other mechanism that might have ended their lives, and no obvious suicide note was located. But by far the most unusual aspect of the scene was the presence of two very different types of face covering. Secured on top of the plastic bag which covered the face of Jacqueline Torres was a grinning Japanese-style kabuki mask,
Yeah, what the
decorated
fuck?
with black, red and green patterns.
What's the difference
Lying
between a
on a table
kabuki
beside
mask
the bed
and
was
like an
an eye
Ani
mask
mask?
covered
Or
in
Oni mask,
feathers.
rather.
Much like those seen at masquerade balls. These two items were very much out of place considering the rest of the scene, with no other Halloween paraphernalia anywhere to be found. The room was relatively tidy, with the door locked and secured, and no signs of a break-in. Personal effects and valuables belonging to the two women were clearly on display, and it did not appear that any form of robbery or burglary had taken place.
Ah, okay.
With the scene photographed, the bodies were duly removed by the undertaker and sent for post-mortem, under the assumption that the cause of death would help steer the investigation as it moved forwards. Days later, the local medical examiner had little of use to offer the detectives in charge of the case. The couple had died as a result of asphyxiation, most likely from the bags which had been taped over their heads. There was evidence of alcohol and recreational drug use in both of their bloodstreams, but not in sufficient quantities to incapacitate or overdose either of the women. Inquiries with staff at the resort, other guests who had been staying there, and the friends and families of the victims also produced little in the way of usable evidence. They had dined alone,
What the
taking their
fuck?
meals back
No
to
one
their
has
room
any information
rather
about
than
this?
eating in the hotel restaurant. Nobody had reported seeing them angry or upset, and they had not ventured outside of the complex to visit any of the neighbouring attractions. When investigators attended the rented apartment in Long Beach where the couple had lived, they found a third mask hanging outside on the front door of the premises. This was similar to the one that had been found on Torres, only with the mouth this time turned upside down into a haunting grimace. The manager of the complex was located and spoken to, describing the pair as good tenants, who were quiet and always paid on time. Enquiries with neighbours revealed that Tapia's sister had attended the location during the week, asking if anyone knew where they had gone, and it became apparent that nobody close to the women had known about their trip to Big Sur. Inside the apartment, the officers found photos of a recent holiday to Las Vegas to celebrate Tapia's birthday. But beyond this, there was little of evidential value to be found. The case that was later presented at the inquest into the deaths proposed that the women had died as a result of a suicide pact. The investigating detectives highlighted the fact that whilst the ropes that had been used to secure Tavez were tightly secured, a certain degree of looseness had been found on Tapia's. They hypothesized that Tapia had secured the bag to Tavez, asphyxiating her, before then incapacitating herself in the same way. Several letters,
Yeah, I don't know
a
about that.
mixture of typed and handwritten messages, had been left on one side in a manila envelope, addressed to the families of the two women. The contents of these were not disclosed during the inquest, other than to state that they were of a personal nature, and explain that both women were clearly in a state of emotional turmoil. It is, however, believed the content of these letters could not be interpreted or construed as a suicide note. Evidence was also presented to the court that Tapia had been in a significant amount of debt at the time of the trip to Gorda Springs, believed to be in the region of $60,000. At the conclusion of the inquest, the coroner found himself in agreement with the evidence that had been presented to him, and the case was closed off as suicide. Taking events at face value, it is hard to disagree with the court's ruling. There was no evidence of foul play found at the scene, or that a third party had been involved in the incident. It was clear that there were significant issues at play in the personal lives of both women, and without knowing exactly what was written in the letters recovered from the envelope, there are no other obvious or alternative explanations which can be argued. And yet, there seems to be something missing from this case. A frustrating factual void which only serves to invite speculation and argument to bridge the evidential gaps. And key amongst the unsolved issues with the Gorda Springs deaths is the proposed version of events put forward by the police, which some commentators still believe to be an unlikely explanation. The accepted account is that Abigail Tapia killed Jacqueline Tavez by tying a bin liner around her head, with sufficient restraint to prevent her from breathing. Tavez had her hands and legs tied, and would have been unable to prevent this from taking place, even if she had wanted to. But it is what happens next that prompts debate. The police contend that having carried out the murder, Tapia then tied her own hands and legs together, before taping the bag that would end her own life over her head. She then lay down perfectly still, and died alongside her partner. Whilst possible, this does, however, seem unlikely. It is
especially like perfectly
to
still.
Fight against the restriction of a body's
Yeah,
airflow,
exactly.
which is why it is impossible for a human to strangle or voluntarily drown themselves. There were no signs, such as friction burns or bruising, that either woman had struggled or tried to break free of their bonds. The peaceful, almost serene nature of how the women were found, as if they had each just lay down to take a nap, raises red flags for many people. And whilst it can be argued that the alcohol and drugs in their bloodstreams may have affected their ability to resist their own deaths, the autopsy results do not seem to support this. It is a case that bears strong similarities to another mysterious death that would take place 7 years later in central London. In August of 2010,
I think it definitely implies that there's someone else
staff at
involved.
Britain's GCHQ headquarters alerted their superiors to the absence of a work colleague,
For it to be like that.
32-year-old Gareth Williams. The intelligence worker had not been seen or heard from for several days, and so officers were sent to his flat in Pimlico to see if they could locate him. On forcing entry into the address, the police found the decomposing remains of the missing analyst in a large sports bag sitting in the tub of the flat's bathroom.
Okay.
The bag had been secured from the outside with a padlock, and Williams was lying naked inside it. Again, no evidence of a third party could be located, or of a criminal offence having taken place. Whilst it was argued that it would have been virtually impossible for the victim to have secured himself in the bag voluntarily, experts conceded that there was a small possibility he could have achieved such a feat, and evidence of an interest in bondage found on Williams' computer seemed to support such a theory. Just as there is a belief that
What?
a third party was involved in the death of Gareth Williams, some believe that the same is true in the Gorda Springs case. Big Sur is notorious for the importation of drugs by Latin American cartels, due to its isolated nature. Is it possible that the couple had somehow been persuaded to become involved in illegal activity to clear their debts? Or were perhaps the unfortunate victims of a reckless criminal endeavour? As compelling a theory as this is, it remains unlikely. There is no evidence of this found in the testimony of the other guests at the resort, or back in the apartment belonging to the women. And whilst the presence of the masks at the scene of the deaths seem to point to something more sinister, the proximity of the incident to Halloween does somewhat explain this.
What?
Finally, it should also be noted that, not unlike Gareth Williams, Jacqueline Tavez was also attached in some way to the military-industrial complex.
Oh shit.
All that aside, Big Sur does seem to be the setting of a significant number of suicides
It's Agent 47.
when compared to similar regions.
Putting someone in a bag.
Some have put this down to the feelings of loneliness and helplessness that such a vast and foreboding area can instill, but there are others who point to mysterious forces which are believed to have made the region their home. For centuries, shadowy spectral figures known as the Dark Watchers have been reported stalking groups of hikers and visitors to the area. Others have reported suddenly feeling overcome by a sensation of utter helplessness and despair that virtually incapacitates them. This sensation has become known locally as the Terror, to which nobody is able to offer a viable explanation.
The Terror.
There are also stories of a strange entity which has confronted people at the nearby Thornwood campground, a humanoid figure wearing a mask made of woven corn, which materializes from the trees during the hours of darkness.
What?
This apparition is believed to be related to the indigenous Essens tribe,
Never heard of that.
still harboring feelings of anger and vengeance towards the settlers who caused the demise of its people. Of course, there is no evidence whatsoever to connect the unfortunate deaths of these two young women with these alleged sightings or supposed phenomena, but it is something which is talked about nonetheless. In the years since this incident, few further details have come to light. Francis Tavez, the father of 26-year-old Jacqueline, has revealed that his daughter had struggled in the past with depression and had previously taken an overdose 2 years before her death. Other than this, all that remains are arguments over the feasibility of the murder-suicide hypothesis.
Like on purpose?
As time has passed, other deaths have since been reported in Big Sur. These include a cluster of apparent suicides at the Carmel Middle School, located a little further up the coast. There are also numerous cases of visitors who have lost their lives on the Bixby Creek Bridge, or along the roads and coastal footpaths nearby, in tragic and mysterious circumstances. Sadly, it seems that even in an area that is filled with such great warmth and beauty, there is a dark and sinister undertone. Something intangible, capable of driving people to make decisions that leave little other than sorrow and unanswered questions in their wake.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Probably not as complicated as it seems, I bet. I would assume. The real answer. This is actually my favorite one. This is actually, they redid this. This is the first one they made. This is a remake. They
In
made
December
an HD
of 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers stationed on an isolated group of islands in the North Atlantic vanished without trace. Was their disappearance the result of a freak accident, or was there something more sinister at work? Join us as we recount the still unsolved mystery of the Flannan Isles.
Mystery of the Flannan Isles. Look at that ghost. Look at that lizard man. The flannel elves. Yeah, that's what he said. Underpants gnomes, the flannel elves. What about the dwarves? What were the dwarves?
There was a sharp intake of breath from the ship's crew as the looming spectre of Alan Moore emerged from the mist. The towering cliffs of this small islet were an imposing sight to behold, no matter how many times one encountered them. Beneath their feet, the vibration of the engine seemed to dampen as the vessel slowed its approach. Standing at the prow, a lone figure kept his eyes fixed on the lighthouse jutting from the summit of this brooding landmass, which was little more than a silhouette.
I wish there was a
beneath the veil
game
of
about
fog.
this.
That in itself was a concern.
We got a couple cool lighthouse
In
games,
these conditions, it should have been lit.
This is a cool story. I like this one a lot.
The man's name was Joseph Moore, a lighthouse keeper from the Isle of Lewis. It had been 6 long days since he had received orders from the Northern Lighthouse Board to return to his post at Alan Moore. He had hurriedly made his way to the harbour at Brestcleat, where the Hesperus had been waiting to take him to the nearby Flannan Isles, but poor weather conditions had prevented them from sailing until this morning. For him, the journey had been an anxious one. He had spent the majority of the trip in deep thought, pacing fore and aft across the ship's deck. Any attempts to engage him in conversation had been met with little more than grunts or nods, and he had refused breakfast, taking only a few mugs of coffee for sustenance. The reports had clearly troubled him. As soon as he had heard about the lighthouse having been dark since the 15th of December, he'd had an unshakable feeling in the pit of his stomach that something had gone terribly wrong. It was not a possibility he was quite ready to accept. The 3 men stationed on the islet, rising from the waves in front of him, were not just his colleagues, they were his friends. As the ship approached the east side of the island, an ominous atmosphere descended over the scene. The Flannan Isles had a haunting loneliness to them at the best of times, somewhat punctuated by the fierceness of the seas around them. But on this morning, as the Hesperus came about, there was something else in the air, something not quite right. Captain Harvey had noticed immediately that the ensign was not flying on the flagstaff, and when Joseph Moore had also made the point that none of the provision boxes had been put out to be restocked, and that there was no welcoming party from either of the 3 men he had been sent to relieve, the eeriness was
there
suddenly
actually is
amplified
a
beyond
movie
words.
about this.
3 long blasts on the ship's
With what's his
foghorn
name?
split
Garrett,
the air as Harvey attempted to notify the lighthouse keepers of
What's the
their
guy's
arrival.
name from 300? Is it Garrett?
When this failed to elicit a response, he ordered that the crew set off a signal rocket from the deck below, but still there was no reply from the 3 men.
The Garrett way.
Save for the crashing of waves against the cliff
wrong,
faces and the cawing of seagulls overhead, an oppressive silence them, which sat heavy in the heart of Joseph Moore. A short time later, a crewman by the name of McCormick approached him.
Gerard Butler.
He explained that the captain had ordered the 2 of them to take the ship's launch across to the East Landing and to report their findings. As the relief keeper made his way towards the waiting boat, he couldn't have known it at the time, but he was about to step into one of the world's most haunting and enduring mysteries. Every day across the globe, people go missing in their thousands. Thankfully, most turn up alive and well.
Is that what it's called?
Not so
Vanishing?
fortunate.
It didn't
Their
get very good
remains are often
reviews. I heard it was
found
not good.
weeks,
I never watched
months,
it.
or even years later, having perished through misadventure
real
or
quick.
foul play. But every so often there are cases in which the missing individuals are never to be seen or heard from again. They simply disappear into the vastness of the world we inhabit. Vanishings like this occur in both urban and rural settings, but in either case, there are often more obvious explanations.
Actually, maybe
After
I should
all,
watch that.
there are plenty of sinister people with sinister motives,
Nothing else to
just
lose.
waiting to take advantage of any given opportunity.
5.8 on IMDb.
But what about more isolated incidents, such as one where a group of
85%
individuals
on
stationed
Rotten
on a
Tomatoes
remote,
there.
uninhabited, and almost inaccessible island, miles away from the evils of the world, simply vanish without trace?
What if a giant hand
On the evening
came out
of the
of the
7th
ocean,
of December 1900,
just grabbed
almost
him?
3 weeks before the Hesperus arrived at the Flannans, Superintendent Robert
even
Muirhead
know.
stepped off the east landing of Eilean Moor and climbed into his waiting launch. Having shook hands and bid farewell to his colleagues, he now headed out to a larger steam vessel anchored offshore, which would take him back to the mainland. As his small boat made its way over the choppy waters, he looked back at 2 of the 3 men he had left behind. They were 43-year-old James Ducat and 28-year-old Thomas Marshall, and they were stood on the east landing waving to him. The third man, 40-year-old Donald MacArthur, was atop the cliffs towering above them, manning the lighthouse as procedure dictated. It was strictly forbidden to leave the light unattended at any time, and so he could not join his colleagues in waving off their supervisor. As Muirhead raised his hand to wave back, not once did the thought cross his mind that he would be the last person to ever see any of these men again, for when the relief vessel arrived 19 days later, they were nowhere to be found.
That's kind of eerie. I know. I started
The
watching
Flannan
that.
Isles,
I love
a group of
Alt
7
Chef
small
X,
islets
but,
situated some
I
20
don't know what
miles west of the
what he's
Outer
talking
Hebrides
about.
in western Scotland,
Is it a show or
were
is
to
it a
be the
book?
setting
What
of
is
this
that?
strange disappearance. The islands themselves were named after the 7th century Irish priest, St. Flannan, and for as long as anyone could remember, they had remained uninhabited. The settlers on the neighbouring Isle of Lewis and the rest of the Hebrides always viewed this bleak and deserted group of craggy rocks with great superstition. Many fishing boats and merchant vessels had foundered there over the years, and although the Hebrideans often ferried sheep to graze on the Flannans' lush turf, they believed it very unlucky to spend a night there. During the 1890s,
Oh, it's a show too.
the Northern
yeah, I'd never heard
Lighthouse
of
Board
that.
decided
All
to construct a
tomorrows.
lighthouse on Eilean Moor, the largest of these 7
I
islands.
want to look into it before I watch the video.
It took 4 years, and building work was constantly hampered by the tempestuousness of the wild Atlantic Ocean, which made it very difficult to land supplies. Nevertheless, the lighthouse was completed and went into operation on the 7th of December 1899. It had no wireless communication, and the only way of contacting the mainland was through the use of visual signals, which could be seen by the Hebrides on a clear day. The lighthouse itself would have been operated by up to 3 men at a time, with a 4th keeper on shore, rotating in as relief. The mystery began on the night of the 15th of December 1900, when a sudden squall broke out in the vicinity of the islands. The first signs of anything amiss came when the captain of an American steamer, the SS Archtor, making its way from Philadelphia to the port of Leith in Edinburgh, passed close to Eilean Moor just before midnight and noticed that the lighthouse was eerily dark. This was something almost unheard of for an operational rock station like the one on the Flannans, and was reported when the ship reached its destination 3 days later. Even so, although a dark lighthouse was considerable cause for alarm, no immediate action could be taken due to the harsh weather. The Hesperus was due to set sail on the 20th of December, carrying fresh supplies and the relief keeper, Joseph Moore, but because of the unfavourable conditions, it was unable to set out until dawn on Boxing Day, the 26th. As Moore and McCormick reached the east landing, Moore instructed his colleague to wait below, whilst he made his way up the steps leading to the plateau, where the lighthouse stood. Moore called out to the 3 men as he negotiated the steep incline, but there was no reply. Upon reaching the lighthouse, he found the entrance gate to the compound and main door both closed. Inside, nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary.
Well, Cthulhu kind of is
The
like
lamps were
both.
cleaned and refilled.
It's the best of
The
both
beds
worlds.
were unmade as if the men had just awoken. The washing up was done, and there were cold ashes in the grate. After his initial observations, he spotted an overturned chair in the kitchen and then noticed that all the clocks had stopped, which only added to his concerns.
That's kind of weird.
Returning to the Hesperus, Moore relayed his findings to the captain, then made his way back up to the lighthouse with more men in the hopes of conducting a wider search.
I've also heard that a lot of this
At the East
story is just
Landing,
like elaborated
everything had
details that
been
people made up
intact,
over time.
But the West Landing provided considerable evidence of damage caused by recent storms.
I'm not sure if they had to wind them.
A box at 110 feet above sea level
Early
had been
1900s.
smashed and its contents strewn about. Iron railings were bent over. The iron railway by the path was wrenched out of its concrete housing, and a rock weighing more than a ton had been displaced above that. On top of the cliff, at more than 200 feet above sea level, turf had been ripped away as far as 10 meters from the cliff edge. Further investigation revealed that the keepers had kept their log until 9 AM on the 15th of December, and their entries made it clear that the damage had occurred before their disappearance. The only other considerable piece of evidence was that 2 sets of oilskins were missing. Only 1 set of the outdoor gear remained by the entrance, suggesting that one of the men must have ventured outside without wearing his protective clothing. This was surprising considering the severity of the weather on the date of the last log entry, and especially during a harsh North Atlantic winter. Of the keepers themselves, there was no sign, either inside the lighthouse or anywhere else on the island. They had simply vanished.
How would the
Moore and
Sasquatch
3
get to the
volunteer
island?
seamen remained behind to attend to the duties of getting the lighthouse back up and running, whilst the Hesperus returned to the shore station at Brest-Cleet. From there, Captain Harvey sent a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board, dated the 26th of December 1900, stating,
"Dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago.
Good accent.
Poor fellows. They must have been blown over the cliffs, or drowned trying to secure a crane, or something like that."
Whatever the cause of the keeper's mysterious disappearance was, several embellishments had been added over the years, such as the classic half-eaten meal, which was supposedly found on the keeper's kitchen table. This is common in so many vanishing tales, but in this case is a complete fabrication. Even the overturned chair has been called into question, with no mention of this in the original accounts. The clocks being stopped is another aspect for many looking for something out of the ordinary, but there is nothing even remotely strange about this fact. All clocks of that era had to be wound in order to continue ticking away. With no one around to do this, they inevitably cease to function.
Oi, mate.
Another point of contention are the log
I guess
entries,
that's why.
which are listed as follows.
December 12. Gale north by northwest. Sea lashed to fury. Never seen such a storm. Waves very high. Tearing at lighthouse. Everything shipshape. James Ducat irritable.
Later on the 12th.
Storm still raging. Wind steady. Storm bound. Cannot go out. Ship passing, sounding foghorn. Could see lights of cabins. Ducat quiet. Donald MacArthur crying. December 13. Storm continued through night. Wind shifted west by north. Ducat quiet. MacArthur praying.
Later on the
Ducat.
13th.
Noon, grey daylight. Me, Ducat and MacArthur prayed.
There was no log entry on the 14th. The final entry was supposedly chalked on a piece of slate, which would normally have been transferred to the logbook at a later time.
December 15, 1 p.m. Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all.
So was that actually written or what?
These entries would have made for disturbing reading, if not for the fact that they are mostly fictitious. The reports on the weather are probably true, but the comments regarding the keeper's mental states do not make any sense when considering the context. A Northern Lighthouse Board logbook is an official, process-bound document. It is not a diary for an employee to record his personal thoughts, especially regarding other members of the team. It seems rather odd to suggest that Marshall would have written such statements about James Duckett. Duckett was Marshall's superior, and it would have been today's equivalent of an employee writing on an office message board or official report that their boss was in a foul mood. Had the men survived, the Northern Lighthouse Board would have rightly asked Marshall to explain why he had written such personal remarks. The comment about MacArthur crying is also completely out of character, as he had a reputation for being a tough old sea dog. In fact, all three men were highly seasoned and rather hardy. It was a prerequisite for the job, so the idea of them cowering beneath a violent storm, which they would have been more than used to as it was a common sight around the Flannans, is an insult to their memory.
Damn.
Finally, there is no mention of the damage recorded at the West Landing, which was present in the original logbook entries, according to Joseph Moore. The source of these false additions has been traced back to an American pulp magazine, published in 1921, many years after the incident took place. This was perhaps a harmless attempt by the publication to add more intrigue to the mystery, but it has ultimately become confused with fact. In any case, no bodies were ever found, no other clues were uncovered, and we can only speculate as to what really happened on those windswept isles in that cold December during the last year of the 19th century. Theories have ranged from the mundane to the extreme, with the most fantastical mentioning sea monsters, boats filled
if it was
with
like a rogue
phantoms,
wave or something like that.
kidnapping by foreign spies,
Or
and
if the
even
rock,
alien abduction.
if it's an island mostly made out of rock, it could fall
There
pretty
are
easily.
2 or 3 more rational explanations, however, and one of these involves the occasional keeper, Donald MacArthur.
The rock.
It has been suggested
itself.
that, despite the log entries being fictitious, MacArthur's mood at the time was highly irritable. He wasn't a full-time lightkeeper, and was used to spending only a few weeks on station at a time. At the Flannans, he was covering for an assistant lightkeeper
Pretty sure
by the
there's a
name
Doctor
of
Who
William Ross,
episode
who
about
was on
this,
long-term sick leave, and who, incidentally,
See?
would quite literally drop dead in the light room of the Ale and Glass Lighthouse 16 months to the day after the tragedy at Aylen Moor. As a result, MacArthur had already spent most of October, all of November, and the beginning of December on the Flannans by the time Superintendent Robert Muirhead visited them on the 7th of that month. The fact that a superintendent took the trouble to visit the keepers at such a remote station in the middle of December is quite unprecedented, and suggests that he did so because there were issues brewing between the men. It is highly likely that Muirhead made the trip to calm the situation and assure MacArthur that he would be relieved on the 20th by Joseph Moore. In MacArthur's eyes, though, this simply translated that he would have to spend yet another 2 weeks away from his family. It is not hard to imagine what may have transpired from this situation. Some have suggested that MacArthur possibly suffered a bout of cabin fever and took the lives of Marshall and Duckett. He then threw their bodies
Yeah, it
and
was an old
himself
episode.
from the cliffs rather than face the consequences of his actions.
Old episode.
There was little, if any,
With,
evidence of any kind of
what's his
struggle
name?
inside the lighthouse, so if this line of thinking is to be taken seriously,
Old guy who wears a
it
hat
would require
usually.
that MacArthur
Tom
lured
something.
the other 2 men to their deaths whilst outside.
I don't remember their names. I don't really know a lot about Doctor Who.
One of the most prominent theories suggests that the men were swept away by a freak wave.
There you go.
It postulates that Marshall and Duckett had gone to secure some of the damaged equipment at the West Landing, leaving MacArthur to man the lighthouse. A box containing mooring ropes and other essential items was apparently wedged in a fissure on the cliffs at 110 feet, and it is thought that one of the men got into trouble trying to retrieve it. The other man who was with him then rushed back to the lighthouse seeking
got his first name
assistance
right.
from
That's
MacArthur, and as they worked to rescue their colleague, all 3 of them were taken unawares by a freak wave. Whilst this is probably the most convincing explanation, it is not without its flaws. First of all, It is clear from the log entries that the disappearance occurred in the late afternoon on the 15th. In the years since, many lightkeepers have questioned why Ducat would have left it so late in the day to try and retrieve the box of supplies, especially with the fading light and deteriorating weather conditions. They agree that any lightkeeper worth their salt would have carried out this task in the morning. Ducat had more than 20 years of experience to call upon, and was by all accounts one of the best lightkeepers in the service. So why would he have unnecessarily risked his life and those of his subordinates when the West Landing was being hammered by 30 to 40 foot waves and the wind was building up to just below storm force? Speaking of the wind, a relatively new theory put forward by Keith McCloskey in his book, The Lighthouse, suggests that a vortex may have been responsible. Many lightkeepers who served on the Flannans will attest to just how strong the winds can get on those isles, with some of them describing how they had been lifted off their feet and carried through the air for quite a distance. Because the Eilean Moor Lighthouse is constructed on sloped ground, the wall around the complex is lower on the west side than at ground level in front of the winch house, which means it offers no protection from westerly winds and causes something of a wind tunnel effect through this narrow passageway. McCloskey postulates that high winds on the afternoon of the 15th of December may have caused shutters or doors around the complex to bang and slam, and that two of the men donned their oilskins and ventured out to remedy the situation. As soon as they turned the corner from the living quarters into the area immediately in front of the winch house, a high wind may have carried them over the low wall and then straight over the 200-foot cliffs to the north of the lighthouse, which are only 15 to 20 feet away. He goes on to say that the third man may have gone out to investigate when his colleagues did not return, not bothering to put on his oilskins as he wouldn't have been outside for too long, only to turn the corner and suffer the same fate. But if this is the case, why didn't any other lightkeepers stationed on the Flannans throughout the subsequent years also succumb to this strange weather phenomenon? Surely it wasn't so unique that it only ever occurred once. The riddle of the Flannan Isles has been an endless source of fascination, one which has inspired stories, films, poems, songs, and even an opera. But the whole truth may never be known.
There's a fucking opera
Something about the
this?
mystery of these three men, isolated at the edge of the civilized world and surrounded by the vast and hostile Atlantic Ocean, not only sends a chill up the spine, it tugs at the heartstrings. They left their families with a promise that they would return over Christmas, but instead, they were never seen again. James Ducat was married with 4 children, MacArthur married with 2, and whilst Marshall was single at the time of the disappearance, he must have sired children at some point in his life, as there are descendants of his alive today. There would be no closure for their loved ones, only heartbreak and confusion. The lighthouse itself remained manned and without further incident up until 1971, when it became fully automated. It is still in operation to this day, and the Isles are now only visited occasionally for maintenance purposes. Over the years, the islands never could quite live up to their cursed reputation.
It'd be creepy as fuck going to this island to do like maintenance on the lighthouse.
But the mystery of Eilean Moor lives on, perhaps forevermore. In closing, we leave you with the words of Superintendent Robert Muirhead, who, in his official report of the 8th of January 1901, said of the keepers, "I visited them as lately as the 7th of December, and have the melancholy recollection that I was the last person to shake hands with them and bid them adieu."
Damn. Yeah, it's like the last thing before, like, just the North Sea, I think. And there's just, like, nothing really out there. There they are. Oh, yeah. They look pretty much exactly like the illustration. Look at that fucking giant mustache. All right. I'm gonna get out of here, I think. I'm gonna beat Thank you for hanging out. For the games and videos.